The paper was still warm from the printer when I read the name. Frank Calloway. Printed in the beneficiary line of a $500,000 life insurance policy. A policy I had funded for 30 years. Not my name. His. I set the paper down on my kitchen table. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there in the quiet and thought about what 30 years actually looks like, because I want you to understand that before I tell you what I did next. 30 years looks like skipping vacations. It looks like driving a car with 200,000 miles on it because the payment on a newer one didn't fit alongside a medical school tuition bill. It looks like wire transfers going out on the first of every month for 9 years, and a son who called me every Sunday, and a graduation photo on my refrigerator that I looked at every single morning. I had been paying that premium since Daniel was 11 years old. I had listed him as the beneficiary. I had never once imagined I would need to check whether my own name was still on it. The change had been processed 3 days after his practice opened. What I didn't know yet, sitting at that table, holding that paper, was that the insurance policy wasn't the first thing he had changed. It wasn't even close to the first. Under my bed, in a fireproof metal box I had kept since his very first year of medical school, there was a document Daniel had never seen. I hadn't thought about it in years. But I had never thrown it away. I think, somewhere, I always knew I might need it. I had kept that box for 9 years without once opening it to check whether what was inside still mattered. A fireproof metal box, the kind you buy at a hardware store for $30, pushed to the back corner under my bed between a pair of winter boots and a suitcase I hadn't used since 2019. I had moved it twice, once when I downsized from the house Daniel grew up in, and once when I repainted the bedroom floor. Both times, I had picked it up without thinking and set it down in its new corner without opening it. I think I believed, on some level, that keeping it closed was the same as not needing it. I left it closed that night. I wasn't ready for it yet. I needed to understand what I was actually looking at first. Daniel had started medical school in the fall of 2014. He was 24 years old, and he had gotten into a program in another state, and his father, my ex-husband, a man I will not spend much time on here, had been out of the picture for 6 years by then. There was no college fund. There was no inheritance coming. There was just me, a paralegal salary, a paid-off house, and a decision I made in the parking lot of a Panera Bread after Daniel's acceptance letter arrived, sitting in my car with the envelope open in my lap. I decided I would find a way. And I did. Every dollar of it. The first year's tuition was $38,400. I know that number the way I know my own birthday. I refinanced the house to cover it. I set up a direct payment to the university so the money moved without me having to think about it each month, because I knew if I thought about it too hard I might lose my nerve. Daniel called me the night the first payment cleared. He said, "Mom, I'm going to pay you back every cent." I told him not to worry about it. I meant it at the time. Year 2, I picked up a second job doing document review for a firm downtown. Evenings and weekends. I didn't tell Daniel because I didn't want him to feel guilty during his board's prep. Year 3, the apartment lease in the city where he was doing rotations came to $2,200 a month, and I covered it because the stipend from the program wasn't enough to cover rent and food both, and I was not going to let my son choose between eating and sleeping in a safe building. Year 4, I bought him a car. A used Subaru, $12,000, because he needed reliable transportation for his residency interviews and the one he'd been driving had started making a sound that no one could diagnose. By the time he graduated, I had spent, and I want you to hear this number clearly, $340,000. I know it to the dollar because I kept every receipt. Not in a folder. Not in a drawer. In that box. Every tuition confirmation, every wire transfer record, every lease agreement I had co-signed, every email thread where I had arranged a payment. 9 years of paper, organized by year, held together with binder clips. I had not done that because I was planning something. I want to be honest about that. I had done it because I am the kind of woman who keeps records. My mother was the same way. She kept every bill, every receipt, every letter. She said you never know what you'll need to prove. I had inherited the habit without inheriting her certainty about why it mattered. Now I was beginning to understand why it mattered. I did not drive home from that parking lot the night of Daniel's ribbon cutting in a state of rage. I want you to know that, because what I did next had nothing to do with rage, and I think that's important. I drove 4 hours home on a highway I know well, with the radio off, and I thought about the last 3 years. The way the Sunday calls had gotten shorter. The way Renee had started answering his phone sometimes, just to say he was busy, he'd call back. The way I had not been consulted about the practice's location, the lease, the name on the door, any of it, even though I had been the person who made the practice possible. I had told myself those things were normal. That children grow up and build their own lives and you don't get to stay at the center of it forever. I had told myself that so many times it had started to feel true. It stopped feeling true when I saw Frank Calloway's name on that beneficiary form. I got home a little after midnight. I did not go to bed. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and I logged into the insurance portal to update my contact information, something I had been meaning to do for weeks, and that was when I found it. The beneficiary change. Processed 3 days after the practice opened. No notification to me. No phone call. Just a name in a field where my name used to be. Frank Calloway. A man who had attended 4 dinners at my table in 9 years. A man who had written no checks, co-signed no leases, driven no U-Haul trucks between cities at 6 in the morning. A man whose primary contribution to Daniel's medical career, as far as I could tell, was a set of golf clubs and an opinion about which specialty paid better. I closed the laptop. I sat in the quiet for a long time. And then I got down on my knees beside my bed and I pulled out that box. I set it on the mattress and I looked at it for a moment before I opened it. Inside, on top of everything else, on top of all those years of paper, was a single document I had typed myself in October of 2014, the week after Daniel's first tuition payment cleared. A promissory note. And signed. I had written it out carefully, listed the terms, left a signature line for Daniel that I had never asked him to fill in. I had drafted it and then folded it and put it at the bottom of the box and never mentioned it to a single person. I don't know exactly why I had written it. I think I knew, even then, that the woman who paid for everything deserved to have something in writing. I just hadn't been ready to ask for it. What I didn't know yet, sitting on the edge of my bed at 1 in the morning with that unsigned page in my hands, was that the insurance policy and the promissory note were only 2 pieces of what I was about to find. The bank account came next. The bank account came next. I didn't go looking for it that night. I was already sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee I hadn't touched, the promissory note folded back into the box, trying to decide whether what I had found in the insurance portal was the whole story or just the beginning of one. I told myself I would sleep. I did not sleep. The following morning I called my bank. I had held a joint checking account with Daniel since his 2nd year of medical school, a practical arrangement, I had thought, so I could transfer tuition payments directly without the delay of wire fees. It had been useful. It had been simple. I had not looked at it closely in over a year because I had stopped using it for anything except the occasional transfer. The woman on the phone was polite. She pulled up the account. She told me, In the careful language that customer service representatives use when they are delivering information they know will land badly, that the account had been converted to a single holder account approximately 6 weeks prior. My name had been removed. The process had been initiated by the primary account holder. I asked her when, exactly. She gave me the date. 6 weeks before the practice opened. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because I had to. This was not a decision Daniel made in a moment of thoughtlessness the week everything changed. This was not a reaction to some argument or some tension between us. 6 weeks before the ribbon cutting, before the photographer, before Frank Calloway's handshake in front of the glass window, 6 weeks before any of that, Daniel had already begun the paperwork. The erasure had not been impulsive. It had been planned. I thanked the woman on the phone. I hung up. I wrote the date down on a yellow legal pad I had placed on the kitchen table the night before. I had already started writing things down by then. I didn't know yet exactly why. I just knew that I needed to stop keeping things only in my head. I called my insurance broker next. I explained what I had found in the portal. I asked him to walk me through the history of the policy, not just the recent beneficiary change, but the full account record going back several years. He put me on hold for a few minutes. When he came back, his voice had changed slightly. Not unkind. Just careful. He told me that the policy ownership had been transferred approximately 2 years prior. Daniel had called the company directly, completed the ownership transfer paperwork over the phone, and returned the signed documents by mail. The transfer had been processed without any notification to me because, at the point of transfer, I was listed as the insured, not the owner. The distinction mattered. The owner controls the policy. The owner decides the beneficiary. The owner can make changes without telling anyone else. I had been paying the premium for 30 years. I had opened the policy when Daniel was 7 years old. I had chosen the coverage amount, named myself as owner, named Daniel as beneficiary, because that was the point, that was always the point, to protect him if something happened to me. At some point in the last decade, I had added Daniel as a co-owner. I remembered it vaguely. He had asked me about it during one of his residency years, framed it as a practical matter, something about being able to update the contact information if I was ever unreachable. I had said yes. I had not thought about it again. He had used that co-ownership to transfer full ownership to himself. 2 years ago. Quietly. And from that moment forward, I had no legal standing to be notified of anything that happened to that policy. I set the phone down on the table without hanging up. I could hear the broker saying my name on the other end. I picked it back up and told him I needed to call him again soon, and I ended the call. I sat there for a long time. I thought about a morning, maybe 12 years ago, when Daniel was still in college and money was already beginning to feel tight. I had been sitting at this same table, actually, or one very much like it, in a house I no longer own, and I had been going over my budget for the coming semester. I had moved a significant portion of my own retirement contribution into a separate savings account so I could cover his housing deposit. I remember thinking, clearly and without resentment, this is what you do. This is what it means to be his mother. You do not keep score. I had believed that. I had believed it completely. I picked up the phone again and I called my sister Patricia. Patricia is 4 years older than me. She spent 22 years as a paralegal for a family law firm in Cincinnati before she retired, and she has the kind of mind that does not comfort you when you call her with a problem. She listens, she asks questions, and then she tells you exactly what she thinks. I have not always wanted to hear what she thinks. That morning, I needed it. I read her the list. The beneficiary change. The policy ownership transfer. The bank account. The date on the account removal, 6 weeks before the opening. She was quiet for a moment when I finished. Then she said, "Do you have receipts?" I said, "I have everything. 9 years of everything. Tuition statements, lease agreements, wire confirmations, the car title, moving invoices. All of it." She said, "Then you're not a victim, Carol. You're a creditor." I had not thought of it that way before. I had been thinking of myself as a mother who had been betrayed. Patricia was telling me to think of myself as someone who was owed a documented debt. Those are not the same thing. A betrayed mother grieves. A creditor acts. That sentence changed the way I held the box. Patricia gave me the name of an estate attorney she had worked with years earlier, a woman named Margaret Holt who had a small practice about 40 minutes from my house. She said, "Call her this week. Bring the box. Bring everything in the box. Don't leave anything out." I made the appointment that afternoon. I want to tell you about the drive to Margaret Holt's office, because I remember it clearly. It was a gray Tuesday morning, the kind of cold that isn't dramatic but just settles into everything. I had the fireproof box on the passenger seat beside me. I had also printed out, the night before, every email I could find in which Daniel had referenced my financial support, messages going back years, some of them brief, some of them longer. There was one from his 3rd year of medical school, sent at 11:30 at night, that I had read so many times I nearly had it memorized. He had written, "Mom, I know how much you've given up for this. I don't have the words right now, but I promise you, when I'm on the other side of this, I'm going to make it right. I'm going to take care of you the way you've taken care of me." I had saved that email because it had made me feel seen. I had never imagined I would one day be sitting in an attorney's office using it as documentation. Margaret Holt was a small woman with reading glasses on a chain and the unhurried manner of someone who has heard a great many difficult stories and has learned not to be surprised by any of them. She went through the box methodically. She read the emails. She asked me a series of questions, about the timeline, about what I had signed, about what I remembered of the phone call when the policy ownership transferred. After about 40 minutes, she set her pen down and looked at me directly. She said that the unsigned promissory note, as written, could not be enforced on its own. She was clear about that. But she said something else that I had not expected. She said that the pattern of documented financial transfers, taken together with Daniel's written acknowledgements, the emails, particularly the one from his 3rd year, created a viable basis for a civil claim under unjust enrichment doctrine. She said the removal from the joint account also warranted examination, depending on the original account agreement. She said, "You came in here thinking you had a sentimental document and a lot of old receipts. What you actually have is a paper trail that most attorneys would consider unusually complete." I had kept everything not because I had planned this. I had kept everything because I was the kind of woman who kept things. Because I had always known, in some quiet part of myself, that the record of what I had given mattered, even if I had never expected to need it. Margaret asked me what I wanted. Not what I was entitled to. What I wanted. I told her I did not want a lawsuit. I did not want Daniel in a courtroom. I did not want to spend the next 3 years of my life in litigation with my own son. I told her I wanted a letter. She nodded. She said she would draft one. I drove home in the same gray cold. The box was still on the passenger seat. I kept one hand on it at a red light, without thinking, the way you keep a hand on something you are not ready to put down. I did not know yet what Daniel would say when the letter arrived. I did not know if he would call, or if he would send an attorney, or if he would simply go silent in the way that some people go silent when they are confronted with something they cannot argue their way out of. But I knew something I had not known 2 weeks earlier, when I had been sitting in a parking lot watching Frank Calloway shake my son's hand through a window. I knew exactly what I had. And I knew exactly what I was going to do with it. Margaret sent the draft to my email at 7:14 on a Thursday evening. I opened it at my kitchen table with a cup of tea I had not touched. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time, slowly, the way you read something when you want to be certain you understand every word before you decide what to do with it. The letter was 4 pages. It named every transfer. It cited the emails, 3 of them, in which Daniel had written things like, "I know how much you've given up for this, Mom, and I'll make it right when I'm on my feet, I promise, and you've been carrying this whole thing and I see that." Margaret had pulled them from the forwarded chain I had printed and placed in the box years ago, not because I had suspected anything, but because I was the kind of woman who printed things. Those 3 emails changed everything. They were not a contract. But they were an acknowledgement. And Margaret had explained to me, in language I could follow, that acknowledgement matters. That when a person receives $340,000 in documented financial support and then writes, in their own words, "I know and I'll make it right," that is not nothing. That is a paper trail with a voice. I set the draft down. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. I felt clear. The way a room feels clear after you have opened all the windows and let the stale air out. Not empty. Just honest. And then I sat with the question I had been carrying for 4 months. If I sent this letter, there was no version of events in which Daniel did not know that I had done it. There was no version in which Renee did not find out. There was no version in which Frank Calloway, who had shaken my son's hand in front of a photographer while I stood in a parking lot, did not eventually learn that the woman he had never once acknowledged had spent 4 months building a case. If I sent this letter, I was not a grieving mother anymore. I was something else entirely. And the question was whether I could live with that. Whether the woman who had written the first tuition check in a kitchen not so different from this one, who had believed, genuinely believed, that love did not require a receipt, could now sign her name to a document that said, "*I kept the receipts. And I intend to use them*. I thought about something Patricia had said to me, the night I had read her the full list over the phone. Not the sentence about being a creditor, though that sentence had changed everything. Something she had said after, when we had been quiet for a moment and I had asked her whether she thought I was being cold. She had said, "Carol. He didn't stop seeing you as his mother. He stopped seeing you as a person. Those are different things. And only one of them requires you to do something about it." I read the letter one more time. Then I called Margaret and told her to send it. But I did not stop there. Because I had learned, in those 4 months, that clarity is not a single decision. It is a series of them. And once you begin, you do not stop at the first one. That same afternoon, I called the attorney back and asked her to open my estate file. I had not updated my will in 11 years. Daniel was listed as my sole beneficiary. I instructed Margaret to remove his name entirely. In his place, I named Patricia, and a women's shelter in the county where I had lived for 31 years, an organization I had donated to quietly for a decade, an organization that understood what it meant to help a woman start over with nothing but what she could carry. I signed the new documents before I left her office. And then I did one more thing. The thing I had not told anyone, not even Patricia. For 7 years, I had been making small transfers into a secondary savings account. $50 here. $100 there. Sometimes more, in the months when I had it. I had labeled the account in my own notebook, not in any bank system, just in my own handwriting, in a spiral notebook I kept in the kitchen drawer, with 2 words, "For Daniel." In case he ever needed it. In case something went wrong. In case the practice failed, or the marriage fell apart, or he found himself somewhere difficult and needed a floor to stand on. $22,000. 7 years of quiet, invisible provision. I transferred every dollar of it into my own retirement account that afternoon. I did not feel guilty. I want to be clear about that too. I felt something closer to recognition, the feeling of finally seeing something you had been looking at sideways for years. That money had never been for Daniel, it had been for the Daniel I had believed he still was. And that Daniel had not existed for a long time. The certified letter left Margaret's office on a Tuesday morning. Sent to his practice address, not his home, not his cell phone. His practice. The place with his name on the door and Frank Calloway's handshake in a framed photograph on the wall. His receptionist signed for it at 10:47 a.m. I know the time because Margaret's assistant sent me a confirmation. I was sitting in my kitchen when it arrived. The same kitchen. The same table. The same window with the same gray February light coming through it. I thought about Daniel opening that envelope. I thought about the moment he read the first page and understood what it was. I thought about what his face might look like, not in anger, not in satisfaction, but in the plain, honest way you think about a thing when you have finally stopped pretending it isn't happening. And then the phone rang. I looked at the screen. It was Daniel. I set the phone face down on the table and let it ring. He called 3 more times that week. I know because my phone kept the record. 3 calls. No texts. Just his voice, 3 times, going to voicemail. I listened to the first one once. I will not repeat everything he said. But I will tell you this, his tone was not what I expected. I had prepared myself, quietly, for anger. For accusations. For the version of Daniel who could look me in the eye at a ribbon cutting and not save me a seat. What I heard instead was confusion. Not sorrow. Not apology. Confusion, the particular, slightly indignant confusion of a person who has never once considered that the rules might apply to them. He used the phrase "I don't understand what this is" twice in 90 seconds. I set the phone back down. I understood what it was. Margaret understood what it was. Patricia understood what it was. That was enough. Margaret handled every communication from that point forward. That had been the agreement from the beginning, and I kept it, not because I was afraid to speak to my son, but because I had already said everything I needed to say. I had said it in receipts. I had said it in wire transfer confirmations. I had said it in 9 years of tuition payments and lease agreements and a promissory note that had been sitting in a fireproof box under my bed, waiting for the moment I was ready to use it. Words, at that point, would have only given him something to argue with. Documents don't argue. 6 weeks after the certified letter arrived at his practice, Daniel's attorney contacted Margaret. The letter that came back was careful, measured, and written by someone who had clearly reviewed the documentation and understood they were not in a strong position. They proposed a settlement. A lump sum of $40,000, paid within 60 days. And a structured repayment plan for an additional $60,000 over 5 years. $100,000. Against $340,000 in documented expenditures. I want to be honest with you, it was not everything. It was not even close to everything. Margaret told me I could push harder, that the unjust enrichment claim, combined with the emails, gave us real leverage. She was probably right. But I had not come this far to spend the next 3 years of my life in litigation with my own son. I had not done any of this to win a war. I had done it to reclaim a floor. To stand on something solid again. To look at my own financial future and see my name on it. $100,000, recovered quietly, legally, and entirely on my terms. That was a floor. I told Margaret to accept. The first check arrived on a Thursday. I deposited it at the branch 2 miles from my house, the same branch where I had wired Daniel's first tuition payment 9 years ago. The teller did not know that. She smiled and handed me my receipt and said, "Have a good day." I said, "Thank you. I will." I drove home. I made a cup of coffee. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same chair, the same window, and I held the deposit receipt in both hands, and I did not cry and I did not celebrate. I just sat there for a while. I thought about the woman who had sat in this same chair 9 years ago and written the first check. The woman who had believed that love, given without condition, would be received the same way. The woman who had kept every receipt not because she was planning for this moment, but because some quiet part of her had always understood that the record mattered. That she mattered. That the things she gave deserved to be remembered, even if only by herself. That woman had been right. She had just needed a little time to catch up with what she already knew. My will has been updated. Patricia is my primary beneficiary. A women's shelter 12 minutes from my house is my secondary. I have a folder in my filing cabinet, labeled clearly, in my own handwriting, with every document Margaret and I produced over those 4 months. It is organized by date. It is complete. Daniel's name does not appear in my estate documents. Frank Calloway's name does not appear anywhere in my life. I do not know what Daniel told Renee about the letter. I do not know what he told his father-in-law, or his colleagues, or the patients who sit in his waiting room beneath that framed photograph. I do not know if he has ever, in a quiet moment, looked at what he did and felt the full weight of it. I stopped waiting for that. Patricia was right, the day she sat beside me while Margaret's assistant confirmed the letter had been delivered. She looked at me and said, "You didn't do this out of anger. That's why it will hold." She was right about that too. I kept every receipt. I want you to hear that again, because I mean it as more than a detail about my particular situation. I mean it as the only advice I know how to give. Keep the record. Not because you are planning for the worst. Not because you distrust the people you love. Keep it because you are a person who did real things, at real cost, over real time, and that record is yours. It belongs to you. No one can change a beneficiary on it. No one can remove your name from it. No one can transfer ownership of it to themselves during a phone call you barely remember. The woman who paid for everything deserves to be remembered. Starting with herself. I have told you almost everything. There is one thing I have not told you, and I have been sitting with whether to say it at all. The night before the certified letter was sent, I sat down and wrote Daniel a letter of my own. Not a legal document. Not something Margaret drafted. Just a letter, in my own handwriting, on plain paper, that said everything I had never been able to say out loud. I did not send it. I still have it. And I have never decided whether the fact that I wrote it, and kept it, means I have more to say, or whether it means I have already said everything that matters. What would you have done with that letter?